Happy Friday, everyone, and happy holidays. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard. I'm your host, Michelle Berard, founder and CEO of Urban Book Editor. And I'm really happy to share this hour with you, where we examine all those places where spirit meets life and the joys and challenges that may bring. You guys know I like to start by thanking Ms. Beverly Black and Tribe Family Channel for helping me create this space for us. Tribe Family Channel is home to an assortment of thought-provoking shows that explore life, spirit, business, and culture, including The Woman at the Well, hosted by Ms. Beverly Black herself. Somewhere in the Middle was born on Tribe Family Channel. And though we have grown onto our own platform, we are ever grateful and loyal to our roots. To paraphrase an African proverb, we are here only because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I want to say thank you to my guest on the November 18th, 2022 show, Men Mastermind Coach and podcast host, Christopher Burns. You can connect with Christopher on LinkedIn and at his website, adaptingleaders.com. If you missed that show, make sure you listen to the replay. You can find our complete show archives, including the November 18th show at the somewhereinthemiddlepodcast.com. I also want to shout out Bruce George of the Genius is Common movement, which encourages all of us to embrace our inner genius and share it with the world. This is an essential message, and I really encourage you to share it with the youth. But it's not just for the kids. We all need to be reminded sometimes that the world needs our genius. Learn more about the Genius is Common movement at www.geniusiscommon.com. Now, this month's guest is really dynamic. He's really doing what I think is great work because he helps leaders advance in their careers, partly through conflict resolution. Jerry Fu is a conflict resolution coach who helps Asian American leaders advance their careers and life journeys. Having taken on several pharmacy leadership roles, Jerry started coaching in 2017 to help other Asian American professionals deal with the conflict they encounter at work, with their culture, and within themselves. Prior to starting his coaching business, Jerry served as a pharmacist and began facilitating leadership workshops in 2012. Today, Jerry offers a range of coaching services, which include individual coaching, group workshops, and keynote presentations. So I'd like to welcome Jerry Fu to Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard. Jerry, thank you for being on the show.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Michelle.
I'm really excited because, I was reading all about what you do, and I'm really interested in your angle on things. But before we get into that, I want to know more about you. And I start my interviews with two questions. So if you're ready, I'll ask those two questions.
Fire away.
All right. Jerry Fu, who are you? And how did you become who you are today?
Yeah. So much to unpack. Some of the many hats that I wear include pharmacist, conflict resolution coach, salsa dancer, musician, cook, amateur stand-up comedian, amateur photographer.
Wow.
And foodie is another one, I guess, just trying all sorts of fun cuisines. Those are parts of the palette and the puzzle that make me who I am.
And how did you get to be this eclectic person? Because it's not often that you find pharmacist, conflict resolution specialist, salsa dancer.
Yeah, that always gets a hook. Yeah.
That's an interesting combination right there. Then you add in foodie, amateur, comedian. How did you become all of this?
Yeah, man, 30 minutes might not be enough. You might have to bring me on for a part 2 and 3, Michelle. We can make it a trilogy or something. So I guess let me unpack the career side of things, just because that starts, it's easy to put those two together. So initially I went into college wanting to be a pre-med. I liked the idea of being a doctor. And then I found out how much work it actually involved to become a doctor. And what I tell people is that unless you have a clear why, much like a lot of leadership literature today, if you don't know exactly what you want to do with your degree as a doctor, you're probably not going to make it. Just because I have a friend who's a pediatrician and he has a heart for kids and he's great with kids, and he's triple board psych now, has a clear purpose, has a very a vibrant, thriving practice. And, it's great to see that in motion. Me, on the other hand, I got a C in organic chemistry because my discipline and focus were not there. And so we quickly had to pivot. And I said, well, I don't want to risk rejection from med school, but let me pick something else in healthcare, because I still like the knowledge base. I still like the fact that it was a service-based profession. So let me figure out what else I can do in healthcare. Pharmacy came to mind. And so decided to pursue that path. And at the behest of my risk-averse mother, took a job with a chain pharmacy when I graduated from school. I finished pharmacy school in Memphis, moved back to Knoxville where my family is. And, my mom had her life planned for me, marry this girl, take this job, and bank away money aggressively and just pray that, one day you'll finally be able to have a couple years where you have enough money to do what you finally want to do. And after 5 years of working in chain pharmacy, and don't get me wrong, there was a point where I was very comfortable with the job just because I had flexible scheduling, and I knew I was doing well enough to keep my boss happy. So as long as you're ahead of the curve, you're okay. And got complacent a little bit. But then after 5 years, after I had a really bad customer service incident, I realized I couldn't afford to stay here any longer or with that company. And so I wanted to teach, but didn't have the requisite degrees or, residency or anything like that, because I was not actively designing my career the way that I would have wanted to. But a friend of mine who worked for a pharmacy consulting company here in Houston said, hey, I know you want to teach, but since you don't have like the advanced degrees, but you can teach through us if you're interested in my position, because I got promoted. I said, absolutely, let me do this. And next thing I know, I'm walking away from a full-time job with benefits to a part-time job where I had to earn my way up. And initially I was excited at the chance because I said, well, this might be the last company I ever work for because I don't want to go anywhere else. 11 months later, I got fired, Michelle. And, it was my fault. I tell people I like the idea of being an instructor more than doing the hard work of being an instructor. And plus, if you don't get along with your boss, it doesn't matter how good you are. It's writing on the wall, right? And at the time, I couldn't appreciate it. It was painful. And, I was afraid of the shame and everyone's asking questions. And honestly, I can say at this point, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it was the wake-up call I needed in order to really improve and recognize, hey, you know what? Your safety net is gone. Like you have got to get better. You've got to pay your bills. Rent don't stop just because you got a bad day, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's when the roller coaster got really topsy-turvy. I ended up at an independent pharmacy house of cards where 4 of my paychecks bounced while I was filling for crooked doctors. That was, that gets a lot of attention. They're like, wait, what? Like, how'd you end up there? Slick recruiter, shady boss, bad combination, naive kid, right? And I had a very misguided view of grace because I said, well, even though he's not holding up his end of the bargain, I still need to hold up mine. And everyone else is around me is like, Jerry, your license is in danger and he's not paying you. You need to leave, right? And so eventually, after 9 months of that, finally got a chance with another company that my friends got me on board with. But they said, hey, we like you, but we can't pay you more than 8 hours a week. And I said, okay, what do I do? And they said, well, you can get more hours at our Austin store if you're willing to drive out there, which is about 2.5 hours away from Houston. So it's not the worst place to end up, but it's not home either. And I had no idea what my life was going to look like at this point. And so I go out there and I just said, okay, God, let me just be faithful with what you've given me. Let me just go ahead and work my way up. And not an interesting opportunity came up that summer. This is 2012 now. And what happened was that some friends of mine who run a pharmacy leadership nonprofit said, hey, we need a facilitator for our national meeting. We know you've been facilitating other topics on the fraternity side, but we need one for our national leadership meeting. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. And the interesting thing, Michelle, is that for the longest time, I hated leadership, or I hated the fact that I felt bad at it. Like I didn't know how to get better at it. And I didn't think I would ever be good at it. And just this very fixed mindset of, oh, it's not worth the headache, especially in chain pharmacy. It's just a little money for a lot of headaches. And you're just like, okay, this isn't healthy. I don't want to deal with it. But seeing leadership modeled for me and then having to teach the material as well, I'm sure, as you know, right, that's the best way to really learn something is to teach it to somebody else. And so that unlocked a new possibility for me. And I said, well, what if I could be a good leader? What would that look like? What kind of work would that involve? And So later that fall, I came back, all invigorated. I just said, okay, I'm ready. And I had the chance to either stay part-time in Austin, which really was a great work team, or take a full-time manager position that opened up in Houston. And I said, I can't stay safe. I'm ready to come home. I need to take on this challenge. So I'm going to take on this manager position. And I was so happy to come home, Michelle. I won't deny that. But over the next year, I got written up actually by that company because I was not managing my technicians well, because I was struggling with conflict when they were behaving badly. I was not confronting them. And then they said, well, there's a problem, but you also have your part to fix in this, and we're going to have to, kind of hold you to it. And so managed to work myself out of that, managed to clean house, showed that I was, worth my salt and investment. But then the company had their funding pulled. So I said, that the owners decided it's no longer viable, that's beyond my control. But the best thing happened was when I just got a random life raft, and the next company, the only reason they gave an interview was that I had leadership experience on my resume now. And I said, wow, that was a really fortunate decision on my part that I now have, things that will get other companies' attention. That company also folded after 11 months, just because, again, it's just really hard for smaller pharmacies to compete against big chains to really stay viable. And so what I tell people, on one hand, leadership saved my career, because it gave me more icebergs to hop to, if you could say. But the problem is, they're still icebergs, right? They're just like, they're going to melt after like 1 or 2 years. And so 4 years ago, when my previous employer went under, I still am employed full-time as a pharmacist. By God's grace, we've been open, 4 years, and I see my owners and see how hard they work just to try to survive. But, I asked myself, well, I'm tired of chasing scripts. I'm tired of fighting insurance companies that tell me how much I'm worth, or not worth. And, but I love teaching these leadership workshops, and I know what kind of training and developmental program I wish I had had when I was trying to become a better leader. So what if I made a career out of, turning around and developing people the way I wish I had been developed? And so thought about coaching, talked to people about coaching, but I, still scared to fail and step out. And I had no idea how to open a business, build a business, run a business, and I still don't. Like, it's terrifying. But in the middle of COVID, you realize I can't put this off any longer. Let me file the LLC. Let me get the website up. Let me open the bank account. Okay. And now it's terrifying, but at the same time, what's the alternative? To go back to a, pharmacy career that, I have to beg for work now because the market's so saturated? No, let me fight for a career that I would actually be excited to go on, and not just what's available to me, but to create something that's really going to be meaningful. So that's the first part of that.
Well, you said some things that just really struck me. And the thing you said over and over again was safety. Mm-hmm. You want it to be safe. You struggled with that concept of safety. Mm-hmm. And then each time you were either forced to take a leap, or you finally decided to take a leap on your own. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so much great literature lately about learning to shift your life from being reactive to proactive, I think, because the way I think my parents kind of approached their lives, and this is just from their own, culture and the way they grew up, but to see things now and to recognize that what they believe and what their definition of success is, even if you can appreciate the context at the time, may or may not still be relevant. It's silly to think that things 20 years from now would still work now, and silly to think that things now would work 20 years from now, but people still want to default to that comfort level, right? And they're just trying to say, oh, I'm just trying to mind my business, I'm just trying to make a little money, I'm just trying to not get too hurt. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the trajectory of that lifestyle, right? And then instead, when you have a lifestyle design mentality, right? So Bill Burnett and Dave Evans wrote a great book called Designing Your Life, Designing Your Work Life, where people realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I actually have a say in the trajectory of where my life is going. What if I actually, found work that would actually be meaningful to me? What if I actually realized I was in control of how I use my time, and then how I, decide things, and, the way I actually make decisions? What if I actually have a say in charting my own course? And now, right now, you're going from reactive to proactive, because you say, now today, everything I do today, I choose to do. Oh, that's pretty powerful, right? I choose to watch Netflix for the next 2 hours. I chose that as opposed to, oh, Netflix knows how to, you know, play on my weak points and do all these things, right?
Exactly.
Are you so helpless? Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's like, okay, so what are you going to do? Right. Are you going to like continue to allow yourself to indulge in this? Or are you actually going to fight for what's truly meaningful and trust that this company doesn't care whether or not you actually succeed at the lifestyle you want to attain?
Mm. This is really an interesting concept. You mentioned designing your life, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much control they do have, particularly if they're in a difficult place. Like you've lost your job because the industry is just what the industry is, right? The pharmacy shuts down, they lose their funding.
Mhm,
And then you have to figure out, well, how am I going to make this work?
mhm.
And a lot of people would feel helpless. What kept you kind of this? What helped you to say, okay, what's my next step? What helped you get to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is, hey, I got to be an adult and pay my bills, right? I don't want to get evicted. I want to be able to eat and not just eat like cheap ramen. Like I need to eat something, somewhat nutritious, right? Um, so that's one good thing is recognizing, hey, there's a baseline I need to meet at minimum. Uh, but with that said, that only goes so far, right? Because it's one thing to just be like, okay, well, hey, like I don't like this job, but at least I have enough to go by. And there's gratitude for that. And at the same time, you know, what will give you the energy and excitement to really go after what you really want and something that could really be great for you, right? It's like you said, my definition of stability was very, very short-sighted. Um, because it would always be the next thing, right? Growing up, it's like, oh, middle school to high school. All right, I got it. I got something else coming up that I'm looking forward to. High school to college. Yeah, this is the next step. College to pharmacy school. All right, yeah, I'm set for the next couple of years. Pharmacy school to job. Hey, it's nice to have a job for right now. And then after the next 4 years of that, you're just like, oh, well, I thought I was going to have another transition, but people are expecting me to work at this job for like the next 10, 20 years. That doesn't sound fun. Okay. But and people forget that, hey, like the fact that people expect moments to happen to them as opposed to going after, taking some initiative. There's a great book called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath that references this. And they say, hey, you have a lot of first moments and breakthrough moments early on in your life, but then after like your mid 20s, 30s, unless you get married and have kids and then experience vicariously the first of your children, right? There's not a lot of highlights unless you choose to, hey, I'm going to take a big trip to Rome this year because I want to explore the city for 3 weeks, right? Or, hey, I'm going to take a 6 month sabbatical and I'm just going to travel the world and backpack in hostels and things like that. And people think, oh, I'll just do that later. You know what? These golden handcuffs are pretty tight, but I'm getting used to them. So I'm just going to hang on to them a little longer. And then it's like, wait a second, the last 2 years, I told myself I was going to go to Italy, but why haven't I done it yet? Right?
Yeah.
When was that supposed to happen?
And then you just end up with a bucket list of things you haven't done.
Exactly. Right. That never gets smaller, right? Unless people work at it.
Mhm. So I'm curious because I kind of want to take you back.
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned your mom.
Hmm.
She was risk averse.
Hmm.
How did she feel when you decided, you know what, med school, not for me? That's a lot of work. I want to switch gears. Did she like lose her cookies?
Not over that, because at least I was pivoting to something that still had a level of stability, right? Like pharmacy at the time was a high demand job market. There were lots of drugstores that needed people with a license and a pulse to step in and count by fives. Um, and I say that half jokingly, but I was one of them. I liked it, right? It was just, you can get 6 figures for managing a workflow and cutting up with people. Hey, that's a pretty good deal. Until people, again, pharmacy, same way. Like pharmacy, I think one of the biggest struggles on a quick tangent is that they were not more proactive in defending their territory or even trying to establish new territory for their clinical services, other things, right? Because now insurance come in and they cut in and they say, hey, you know what? We don't want to pay you this much money anymore. We're hemorrhaging too much money on this drug. We're just going to stop covering it. And so now, right, they should have been more proactive, but now they're continually reactive. Well, what can we still get? What can we settle for? What can we still salvage? And yeah, it's just really sad to see. so many students that, go into this profession to do something noble, and, but they are also expecting a certain quality of life to come with it. And that is no longer guaranteed.
And so when you switched to pharmacology, your mom was like, okay, that's cool. But then she saw the industry doing what it was doing. She saw you leave different jobs and whatnot. Did she freak out at that point?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah,
I see
because
myself,
yeah,
as a mom, how
yeah.
would I be freaking out if my kid was going through that, and what would I be thinking?
Yeah, no, it's a perfectly good standpoint to come from, because I think, and I've talked with, now that I know so many female friends that happen to be moms and what they want for their kids, right? My mom, and I actually had this discussion in other podcasts. For some reason, the host wanted to ask me about my relationship with my mom. And I tell them, you know what? There is no question how much my mom cared. And the challenge then becomes, well, how does her love express itself? And is it truly helpful? Because my mom has, for better or worse, she likes to be a rescuer. She likes to feel like she's being helpful. And so if I'm struggling with learning Chinese, or if I'm struggling to like cut something like a vegetable in preparation to cook, she's like, oh, no, let me help you with that, right? But what happens when you keep helping someone, right? They, in a way, become helpless, right? This is going to be bonus material for somebody, but when people find out I did not know how to do my own laundry until I actually went away for college, like they just kind of stare at me. They're like, what, really? And I was like, yep, can't make that up. And so, yeah, all that to say, right. I walked away from all these benefits where she thought, her life track plan for me was kind of derailed. And then I'm going through these companies, and, none of these companies have good 401ks. No, none of these companies are lasting long. Okay, now what? And, to her, for better or worse, like she still keeps trying to shield me from things. And she's like, I don't know if you know how much I'm protecting you from. And now all I can say is, well, until I experience that, fire for myself and realize just how dangerous the world it can be out there, like I can't expect to get stronger. Like I did not become a cook like until like she stopped cooking for me. And I didn't want to admit that, because she's a great cook and I like being at home, and she wanted me to cook. She wanted me to learn how to cook. And I was just like, I'll just watch more TV. And she would be like, oh, well, Jerry, well, let me just, he's had a rough day at work. Let me just cook some more. And, but I never learned, right? Until I had to move out of the house. And even when some friends were kind of to teach me, they still kind of had to push me out of the nest and be like, okay, no, Jerry, like we can't keep doing this for you. And then you learn and you're like, okay, this is terrible, but I got to get better at it. Okay, now I can actually hold my own, right? So
that's
yeah.
awesome. But that's really what a parent's job is, in my opinion, is to help you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So that you can eventually take care of others, like, and hopefully little by little to teach you stuff along the way, right?
Of course, yeah. And to do it in a way where, you see this balance, because on one hand, with Asian culture, right, like I would love if I, God willing, someday get married and have kids, like I want my parents to be in their lives. Like I think that's just wise and helpful, because I need free babysitting, right? Like there's
if only for that reason.
It's a mutualistic relationship. It is not a one-sided thing. It is clearly, they want to be grandparents. Okay, you're going to spend time with grandkids. Like that comes with the territory.
Big fan.
Yeah, right. And so you see this balance of, hey, we want family involved, and yet at the same time, right, this has come up recently in some discussions I've had with friends. What are the healthy boundaries around like your relationships with your parents and your kids? And to understand, hey, I don't have to cut you off at 18 and be like, okay, good luck, right? I mean, I would probably still be the kind of guy to be like, okay, let me help you a little bit with your tuition money, because that's just, I feel like you should have a little help with that, but not to the point where they don't know how to stand on their 2 feet, right? At some point, yeah, they should be able to live on their own, pay their own bills. Can we talk as friends? Sure. Do you want my advice? Only if you ask for it, right? I'm not going to step into your life now that you're an adult. At the same time, yeah, I'm always going to be your dad, right? I'm always going to have something to say, but ideally I'd be able to, kind of work myself out of a job, right? So it'd be like, hey, look.
Hopefully, if you do it right.
Yeah, exactly. There's a good way and a bad way. I've done both.
No, that's interesting. So I'm wondering, is there truly a cultural difference in how the parent-child relationship evolves over time? Asian culture versus white culture, maybe, if there is such a thing. African-American culture is, what differences have you seen among your friends, for example?
Yeah, I think I'm smiling because this is such a great question and it's such a nuanced answer. Because honestly, it's less about like ethnic culture as opposed to just this overall theme of this desire for control. Because I've
Mm.
seen parents in Asian cultures who understand, hey, um, yeah, my kids are my kids, and at some point I need them to grow up and do their own thing. On the other hand, I also see plenty of parents that are like, no, I'm your mother, and it doesn't matter how old I am, I'm still your mother. And yeah, but I've seen this in other cultures too, because people tell me, you think Asians are the only ones that deal with shame and like like controlling stuff. And I was like, no, I just know that it's magnified because that's all I've known my whole life. And yeah, because I'll give an example. So my residential assistant during college here in Houston. Um, she and her husband seemed to be two of the most well-adjusted like white people I've ever known. Like they were just very chill, very calm. They met their freshman year, got married, and it's just like, yeah. And I told them, I said, Mike and Jen, you make it look so easy. Like I can't believe this. And but to see that in their parenting as well, and they're like, oh, you see the tension where they're just like, well, Adam's really messy in this room, and I'm just like, well, can you clean it up just a little? But they both understand, hey, our kids are our kids. Like we're not going to tell them to be accountants or doctors or engineers. Like that's not for us to decide. We're happy to kind of encourage them and help them kind of discover what a worthy vocation is. But we're not here to tell them, hey, you have to get married by this age. Hey, you have to do this by this time. And they just had, you have to be intentional, but you also have to know when to be hands off, I think, with certain areas of their lives. So I'll admit, I've seen like, I feel like a higher percentage of Asian parents like deal with this controlling issue. And just because we're, especially now with like this Asian American, like, kids who are, the parents are immigrants, and everyone is saying, oh my goodness, like I have to take care of my family and my parents on top of raising my kids, and the money that has to go be shared among all three. Now I thought it was just going to be my wife and kids, like leaving Cleve, but nope, turns out my parents are still in the picture.
That's interesting because there's discussion in the Black community about that as well, particularly among Black people who are considered to be more successful, right? That their money doesn't just go to them and their nuclear family. It often goes to support other members of their families, whether it's a mom, a grandmom, a cousin, or what have you, who's not in the same kind of position. Yeah. And I wonder if we see that particularly with people who are newer to this country, because, Hispanics, they're always sending money back home. To help support family back there, to also do things, people from the continent, from Africa, in different countries will do the same thing, send money home to buy land. Is that something we see particularly, you think, with people from other countries, or is it just throughout our society here in the US?
It's a good question to ask, simply because, you look at the family unit, right? And to say, hey, what is the importance of family? And, my mom always tells me, oh, Jerry has to get married and have kids because who's going to take care of him in his old age? Like she firmly believes that. And even though I have a community outside my family that I trust, that I know is loyal to me and that we're going to be there for each other, she's like, well, when push comes to shove, it has to be family. On one hand, that's true. On the other hand, it hasn't been. There's a lot of family I haven't talked with in a while, right? A quick tangent on what you said, where you're just like, hey, all this success is not just for me. Like I have to bless all these people now as a result of this. There's a phrase that Dave Hitz, who's the founder of NetApp, mentions in his book. He says, success breeds liability, right? Is that like, it's just like, hey, you're successful, great. Hey, now, all these old uncles or, distant relatives coming out of the woodwork. Hey, you want to help my startup restaurant? You want to do all these other things? And you're like, I didn't know. I had all these people, I haven't seen you in a while. It's like, well, yeah, because now I made my first million and now you want a chunk of it, right? But yeah, I think the question comes back down to, how is your family doing, right? Because if it is strong and tightly knit and they've demonstrated over time that they have been there for you, and not just because of blood relations, because that goes two ways, right? If it's one hand to say, hey, blood's thicker than water, we're going to be there for it. It's another when people use that to justify entitlement, right? Hey, I'm your mom. You're supposed to take care of me, right? Hey, I'm your uncle. You're supposed to take care of me. My mom probably has more leverage than my uncle, but same thing, right? It's just like, hey, there's strings attached, and you learn just how selfish a long game some of these parents are playing. They're just like, no, I didn't have kids because I love the idea of being a mom. It's like, no, I need to labor on the farm, right?
Well, I mean, but there was a point in, and I would argue maybe in rural areas to some extent that might still be the case. Who knows? The United States was built up that way in a lot of ways. That was part of our culture, particularly when it's more rural. So is that something you think is all over the world? We'd see the same things?
That's a good
I'm
question.
just curious what your thoughts are.
Oh, thank you. You make me feel like the cleverest person, I think, again, just comes back down to now that a lot of our basic needs are being met, right? Because before we had these farms and we had all this setup where people were just focused on just trying to survive, right? They were just like, hey, the plague is killing all these people. And now we have vaccines. So now we don't have to think about that as much, right? Where we say, hey, diseases are not as big a factor in our survival. Now we have places that have adequate food, places that are plenty still starving. That's a whole other conversation, right? But now that we have all this technology, all these resources at our disposal, people are starting to struggle with, what do I do now that I have more free time, right? What do I do with my time? And where do we find meaning? And so you have a very dangerous opportunity, because now companies are starting to hit you with marketing for all these needs that you didn't think you needed, but they sold it to you so well that all of a sudden now I have to have the nice furniture, I have to have the big house. And it's like, really? I don't know if you need these things, but I think a big challenge is just the fact that, we're able to move up Maslow's, hierarchy and realize, hey, you know what, we're able to think about bigger things. And a lot of people don't like that, right? They say, I'm bored, and let me just dope myself up with drugs, or, go do something crazy, because you have free time because you didn't have to plow the fields just to pay your bills and put food on the table. Maybe for some people they need that, right? Go back to a life that where they recognize the struggle early on, and that they're a little more grateful for what they have now.
Or just being busy from sunup to sundown.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot to be said about being busy, what it keeps you from doing, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. What are you being? What's that distracting you from? If you're busy with, even if you're busy with the right things, if someone tells me they're busy, the clue is that they're probably avoiding something, right?
I don't know, man. Sometimes I'm looking at my list of things to do and going, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's another great question. Just how did I get to this point? I made my decisions and now I feel like they're making me. I have no idea. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in how all this comes together with conflict resolution, because there's some aspects. So, I was on your website, and it seems like part of what you help people with is getting themselves into a place where they're more confident, where they're more centered and able to express what it is that they need to have difficult conversations. And presumably that could be with family, that could be with coworkers, that could be with a boss, could be in a love relationship.
Oh yeah.
So how does all this tie together in terms of conflict resolution and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. Conflict, for the longest time, kind of similar to what I said about leadership. I just said, conflict is difficult. It's no fun. I can't seem to be good at it. And fine, let me just give in every single time and just hopefully I get over this resentment that I feel about myself. And, on one hand, blessed are the meek. On the other hand, Jesus, took a whip of cords and drove people out. So, what do you do with that, right? But he said meek people are blessed. It's just there's a time and place for that, right? And that's another.
He said turn the other cheek, but he was also quite a revolutionary.
Absolutely, yeah. Regardless of whether or not you're a Christian, Jesus is a fascinating figure. But we can table that for now. But I think the main thing is recognizing that conflict is a blessing. Are you willing to see that conflict is a blessing? Because it's everywhere. And even if you resolve one, what's waiting behind the next corner? Another conflict, and probably a bigger one than you're used to dealing with. And when I realized that, personal development was not going to end now that I've set myself on this, treadmill. It's like David Allen says in his book, Getting Things Done, and I've quoted this several times. It's like the better you get, the better you'd better get. And that's what basically happens here. Conflict is everywhere, right? Whether it's in your relationships or I don't even know what I want, or even between the current you and then the future you, right? The conflict between what your company's doing now to survive versus what the company needs to do next, right? There is conflict there. There's conflict with cultural expectations, family expectations, and either it drives you to an extreme like suicide because you just say, I'm tired of dealing with this pain and I just rather just distance myself from all of it, where you just avoid it completely. But you don't, just because you avoid it doesn't mean it's any better for you, right? So at one point do you stop avoiding the gunfire and running toward the gunfire instead, right? And so, yeah, what is it that I try to do for people? Well, help them, ask them, what is the story around conflict? What is it? What are you telling yourself about this conflict, right? Let's figure out why conflict bothers you so much, right? What are you telling yourself about it? And how do you think you want to handle it better? Like if you were successful at conflict, how can we open that possibility that you might actually be good at this? And what kind of plan do you need to put in place? What kind of practice do you need in order to be able to trust that closure is always going to be better than the comfort that you're settling for? Because I can tell you, when I had to evict a roommate for defaulting on his lease, he basically dared me to call the police. Like he wasn't going to just move out. Like I tried, like, and I knew the day where he officially, I was waiting for him to show up with the check, and he never did. And I was just like, oh, like that was heavy. And basically to say, well, you know what, let me beg for some extensions and maybe I can stall a little bit. But he wasn't going to say, you know what, I violated the lease, I'm just going to be an adult and move out. He didn't do that. And so it was up to me to say, hey, you know what, as long as I'm tolerating this, he's going to take every inch that I give him. So, okay, let me do something about it. So yeah, what do I do for people? Give them confidence to realize, hey, conflict doesn't have to bother me. Give them clarity and the steps that they need to take to say, hey, I don't use force, I'm going to use finesse, and make sure that I understand that this is a relationship that for someone I respect, even if I disagree. Let's have an open dialogue. And then, yeah, let's give them closure. Oh, I'm so glad we got past that.
Yeah. That's important. Well, I don't even know what to say here. This has been a stunning conversation, but we are coming close to the end of our time together. Jerry, how can people get in touch with you, and what do you want to share with our audience that maybe they should know in these last couple of minutes?
Yeah, thank you. The easiest way to get in touch with me is to go to the website, which is www.adaptingleaders.com. You can schedule a free 30-minute call, no strings attached. Hey, just tell me what you're working on. If I can offer any help, great. If you want a formal coaching package, or if your organization feels like, hey, we've got some unresolved conflict, we'd like you to come in and help us navigate this, happy to do that for you. If you're on a tighter budget, hey, take the free call. I have a free blog. I will be happy to give you a list of books that helped me in my own personal development with this, and just buy them on Amazon or a discount, bookstore, and have at it and bootstrap it. So I tell people, I'm not here to bankrupt anybody. I'm not here, but I am here to provide a value that hopefully is several times over what you're paying me. If I had to share one story, I think just to illustrate where we are with everything, and just to kind of give some people a concrete example to kind of learn from and build on, I'll share this. So I had there was a networking event of all the internationals that I went to recently here in Houston, and there happened to be an older white gentleman that was in the middle of things, and we started talking, and this is at the height of the media coverage around some of the Asian hate crimes that were going on, and he wanted to ask me. He goes, "Hey, you're Asian, right?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, my family's from Taiwan," and it's like, "So tell me, have you experienced anything like what they're saying there? Have you experienced any discrimination firsthand? Is it really as bad as they're saying?" I said, "Okay, well, let's hold on a second. Did you know that Houston's Chinatown is built on discrimination?" He's like, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, they didn't want the Asians in certain parts of the city, so they made them settle in the southwest side of the city." He's like, "Oh, It's like I said, you know what's even worse? They gerrymandered that district and divided it up in a way that they would have no voting power. Like they divided it so they wouldn't have that. It goes, oh, that doesn't sound good. It's like, yeah. So just because there's no physical pain or, direct violence experienced on my part, and I'm thankful for that, does not condone a system that actively is discriminating against us for fear of control, right? Coming back to, again, like we have this struggle with control, and they said, well, we have the laws, we write the laws. Okay, let's do things to make sure that we stay in power, because, we can't trust them, but we like what we can do for ourselves. And so I say this conversation to actually show him grace, because I can't assume that he was just being obnoxious or ignorant. It was just simply an opportunity to explain my side and to get him to maybe think a little differently about what he's seeing, what he's reacting to, or what he's being exposed to on the media. And I think if everyone took that stance of humility to say, hey, you know what, let me give him the benefit of the doubt. Like that, I feel a little upset by that, but hey, let's dig in a little deeper and just make sure that I'm not going to pounce like a lion when I should be kind of doing more detective work around this comment. One book plug I'll give, Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein, is a very quick read and has some great strategies and best practices to really build strong relationships among people, even as we become more aware of our internal prejudices.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Guys, make sure you go to Jerry's website and connect with him. Jerry Fu, thank you for being on Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day, guys.
So that's our show this month, guys. You can reach out to me online at urbanbookeditor.com or michelleberard.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as Urban Book Editor. Feel free to send in some topics you'd like us to cover on the show. Send me a note. I'd love to hear from you. We will see you after the new year on January 20th in 2023, when my guest will be executive coach and leadership consultant, Michael Sieber. You can find us once a month on Fridays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern at the somewhereinthemiddlepodcast.com. Let's continue the conversation. You guys be good, stay mindful, and remain prayerful. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday and a safe and happy new year. Peace and blessings, y'all.